Big Bad Wolf Daddy is the second episode of Disney's House of Mouse, and I have to say, there are a few things I like about this episode. One of the short cartoons that feature in it, I love, and there's also a character that's featured in this who is one of my personal favourites, who I think is often overlooked. So for me, that was quite an exciting moment. This episode aired in January of 2001. Of course, Disney is pretty timeless, and this episode, it kind of doesn't feel like it was 21 years ago. It's kind of hard to believe, and I kind of don't believe it. In this episode, Donald Duck has invited the Big Bad Wolf to perform at the House of Mouse. The last time he was at the House of Mouse, before the show was created, he basically blew the club down and caused a lot of problems. So Mickey's not exactly keen on this idea, but Donald Duck has invited him along anyway. And interestingly, Ludwig von Drake has psychoanalyzed the Big Bad Wolf and determined that the reason he huffs and puffs is because he has this fear of doors, or he has this kind of problem with doors. So they have to try and remove all of the doors at the House of Mouse, which gives us a really interesting scene with the door, or doorknob, from Alice in Wonderland. And it just made me wonder, I wonder what it would be like if there was a cartoon where Professor Von Drake analysed every Disney character. I'd love for them to do something like that, where Professor Von Drake sits down with a Disney character on his couch and analyses them, putting it with new clips of the characters, old clips of the characters. It would be a lot of fun, and that was just kind of a little insight into what that would have been like. Certainly enjoyed it. With regards to the Big Bad Wolf as a character, he definitely doesn't feel like the Big Bad Wolf of the classic Disney shorts. The little pigs do feature in this, but he didn't really remind me too much of the classic Big Bad Wolf. So although it harks back to those Disney days where he was quite prominent in their cartoons, wasn't really a fan of the character himself. Although, the second he opened his mouth, I was able to identify that he was voiced by Jim Cummings, because he sounded basically identical to Pete. And Pete is also voiced by Jim Cummings. So I kind of wish the voice had been a little bit different. I wish Jim Cummings had maybe done something a little bit more unique with the voice. But aside from that, I could take the character or leave the character. The character that I was definitely pleased to see, Thomas O'Malley. Mickey announced that he was supposed to be having the O'Malley and the Alley Cats playing, and unfortunately they had to cancel, or they were cancelled. But Thomas O'Malley does pop up on screen and have like one or two lines to say. Thomas O'Malley is one of my favourites. I feel like the Aristocats, with the exception of Marie, are often overlooked, particularly today. I don't know many people who would say the Aristocats is their favourite Disney film, even less so Thomas O'Malley their favourite character. He was definitely my favourite character growing up. That made me very happy. Also, I loved the Censor monkeys, which brings us on to the shorts. I will discuss each of the 3 short cartoons that featured in this in separate videos in more detail, but I will just briefly go over them here. So, the one that included the Censor monkeys is actually a short cartoon called Donald's Charmed Date. And in this one, he's on a date with Daisy, and it's all about him having bad luck. Everything seems to be going wrong for him, and then Daisy encourages him to go on this roller coaster. And it's kind of like a ghost train, and it gives us some really gorgeous, spooky animation that I absolutely love. But he goes on this roller coaster, and it goes underneath a set of ladders. It crosses a black cat's path. I think it would be a fantastic idea for an actual ride where you have to go through all of these superstitious things. I genuinely, I'm not superstitious, but I genuinely don't know if I'd go on it. But anyway, they have this cartoon, and it actually stops and cuts back to the clubhouse, or the club. And kind of they interrupt the cartoon, and the Censor monkeys say that they don't like the way the cartoon is progressing. Donald has to wear all of his safety gear and things instead, which I thought was very funny, kind of harking at the fact that cartoon characters go through all kinds of disastrous situations and still come out unharmed. I really thought that was quite an interesting thing, kind of cutting the cartoon short and then cutting back to the House of Mouse before going back into the cartoon. I thought it was a really interesting approach and definitely rooted it firmly in this specific episode. But as a cartoon short on its own, I really liked it. The other one is a Pluto Gets the Paper episode. This one features Mortimer, obviously Mortimer Mouse, who is a classic icon of Disney, and I liked his interaction with Pluto here. It's a very short of about a minute, maybe a minute and a half, and I like the animation style of Mortimer. I thought it was a pretty fun version of Pluto getting the paper. And the last cartoon is How to Be Groovy, Cool and Fly, which is actually one of the Goofy how-to cartoons. I don't know if it's technically considered canon Goofy how-to, because that is a separate kind of canonical series on its own. But in this one, we're being taught about the fashions from kind of the 50s and 60s through to the 70s, 80s, 90s, and then of course the very, very early noughties. And I loved that. I loved Goofy as Princess Leia. I loved Disco Goofy. I think the animation for that was a lot of fun. Really thoroughly enjoyed that one. So the 3 cartoons in this one were brilliant. The actual House of Mouse episode itself, I really enjoyed. The character of the Big Bad Wolf wasn't really what I would have hoped for. I would have preferred him to be a bit more like the classic Big Bad Wolf, and the same with the Little Pigs, of course. But ultimately, I really enjoyed it. Brownie points for showing Thomas O'Malley. The episode itself is definitely a lot of fun.